My parents cut my college dreams for my brother's ego. Now I make more than both of them combined. They told me to stay close so Zach wouldn't feel left behind, then used me like a backup plan when his life fell apart. Now I've got the degree, the six-figure job, and peace they'll never touch. They raised me to be invisible, so I disappeared and thrived. My name's Ethan Parker, and if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own family, well, welcome to my world. Growing up, I always felt like a background character in someone else's story, and that story belonged to my younger brother, Zach. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't mistreated in the locked in a basement kind of way. I was fed, clothed, and kept alive. But emotionally, I was invisible. My parents, Greg and Linda, made it painfully clear early on who the star of the Parker family was. Spoiler alert, it wasn't me. Zach came into the world with these big blue eyes, a perfect smile, and this natural charm that made people melt. Nurses fawned over him. Relatives couldn't get enough. He was like the golden retriever of babies, adorable, easygoing, always the center of attention. I, on the other hand, was just there. Skinny, quiet, and easy to overlook. And that's exactly what happened. From the minute Zach was born, it was like someone flipped a switch. I wasn't just a kid anymore, I was a shadow. Everything became about him. His first steps? Celebrated with a family cookout. My stray day report card? Tossed into the kitchen junk drawer like a grocery receipt. I remember once in 3rd grade, I brought home a perfect report card, grinning ear to ear, and all my mom said was, "That's good, honey," while taping one of Zach's lopsided finger paintings to the fridge. A drawing of a purple dog got prime real estate. My hard-earned grades? Not even a magnet. Zach grew up really knowing that he was special. And when a kid grows up on that kind of praise buffet, they either stay grounded or become unbearable. Take a guess which direction Zach took. By the time we were both in grade school, Zach was a full-on diva. He threw tantrums if he didn't get the cereal he wanted. He'd scream and cry until my parents gave in, and half the time I'd get blamed for making a scene just by existing nearby. I can't count the number of times he hijacked things I loved, my toys, my TV shows, even my friends. If I had something he wanted, it was as good as gone. But the worst part? My parents just let it happen. They'd shrug it off like, well, he's younger, he doesn't know better, or just be the bigger person, Ethan. Being the bigger person turned into a lifelong job title I never applied for. Family vacations? Zach picked the destination. Dinner? Zach chose the menu. Movie nights? Guess who picked every single time? I wasn't even consulted, it's like they forgot I had a voice. You ever try to speak up and feel like the air just swallows your words? That was my childhood. I was the wallpaper in the Parker family photo, present but barely noticeable. The older we got, the worse it became. Zach got a shiny new bike for Christmas. I got socks. He joined the baseball team and suddenly the whole house was covered in trophies and team photos. I won a statewide writing competition in 8th grade. You know what my parents said? That's nice. Make sure to cheer extra loud at Zach's game tonight. It wasn't just favoritism. It was like I didn't count. So yeah, by the time high school rolled around, I wasn't dreaming about parties or prom. I was counting down the days until I could leave. Escape. Get the hell out and finally live a life where I wasn't Zach's invisible older brother or Greg and Linda's afterthought. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. A space to breathe. A place where I mattered. And I had no idea yet just how far I'd go to get it. By the time I was a senior in high school, I had one goal: get out. Out of the house. Out of that town. Out from under the thumb of a family that barely remembered I existed unless Zach needed something. I wasn't the type to scream or slam doors. Instead, I poured everything I had into my grades. I studied like my life depended on it because in a way it did. While Zach was out partying and getting carried through classes on sheer charisma and parental excuses, I was grinding. Quietly. Relentlessly. And finally it paid off. A full-ride scholarship. Not just any scholarship either, to one of the top finance programs in the country. Out of state. Prestigious. The kind of opportunity most kids dream of. When I opened that acceptance letter, I stared at it like it might disappear. This was my golden ticket, my first real shot at building a future that didn't involve being Zach Parker's backup singer. I showed it to my parents expecting, maybe not a celebration, but at least a good job. Instead, my dad barely looked at the letter before saying, "You're not going." I laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Zach still figuring out his path, my mom added, like that had anything to do with me. We don't want him to feel bad if you go off to some elite college while he stays local. I blinked. They were serious. My chance to leave, to change my entire future, was being blocked because my little brother might get jealous? That moment snapped something inside me. All the quiet hurt, the invisible wounds from years of being overlooked, they all rushed up at once. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I smiled. And I lied. I told them I'd take their advice. That I'd stay local. That I'd enroll in the nearby college like they wanted. But I had one condition: if I'm staying here, I said calmly, I want to live in the dorms. I need some independence. They agreed immediately, almost too fast. Thought they'd won. But I already had a different plan. A few weeks later, I packed up my things, told them I was moving into the dorms, and left. Not for the local college, but for the one that gave me the scholarship, halfway across the country. They had no idea. Turns out, the scholarship covered 70% of my tuition and housing. The rest? I used the money my dad kept sending me, the same money he thought was going toward the local school. I'd check in now and then with generic updates like, classes are going well, or midterms were tough this semester. They never asked questions. I don't think they really cared to. And honestly, it was the best decision I've ever made. That school changed my life. For the first time, I was seen. I wasn't Zach's brother. I was Ethan, the sharp kid from out of state who asked good questions in class and crushed every internship interview. I built a life from scratch, new friends, professors who believed in me, a career path that felt like mine and mine alone. While my parents and Zach thought I was bumming around a state school 20 minutes from home, I was acing finance courses, networking with industry leaders, and quietly building the foundation of a life that didn't depend on anyone's permission but my own. And the best part? I was finally free. College wasn't just a place for me, it was a clean slate. No more living in the shadow of Zach, no more walking on eggshells around my dad's moods or my mom's guilt trips. For once I could finally breathe. And I didn't waste a second. I threw myself into every opportunity one could find. Finance clubs, internships, part-time gigs, case competitions. I became the guy who showed up early, stayed late, and asked the questions no one else thought to ask. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore, except maybe myself. By the time I hit my senior year, I had 3 internships under my belt and a job offer in hand, 6 figures, full benefits, relocation bonus, the whole package. My classmates were scrambling for interviews, and I was already planning my first apartment. It felt unreal. Like I'd stepped into the life I used to daydream about while Zach picked the movie for the 5th night in a row back home. I graduated early thanks to an accelerated program and extra credits I'd stacked each semester. No one in my family knew, of course. As far as they were concerned, I was still working toward a basic degree at the local college. I kept the lie going partly out of habit, partly out of survival. My dad continued sending me tuition money which I didn't need but still accepted. Not out of greed but because in some twisted way it felt like overdue compensation. A quiet reparation for years of being overlooked, ignored, and passed over. I used it to pay down rent and build my savings. For once I wasn't drowning, I was actually comfortable. But here's the thing no one tells you about freedom: sometimes it's lonely. I had the job, the apartment, the growing savings account. I was doing everything right. And yet, every once in a while I'd catch myself wondering what it would feel like to call my parents and actually hear pride in their voices. Or to have someone from my family ask me how I was really doing, not just out of obligation, but because they cared. I didn't miss them exactly. I missed the idea of them, the fantasy version of a family that supports you no matter what, the kind of parents who celebrate your wins and help you up after your losses. The kind of little brother who looks up to you instead of knocking you down every chance he gets. But that wasn't my reality. Never had been. Instead, I got a mother who could go weeks without texting, a father who cared more about appearances than his own children, and a brother who saw me as competition rather than kin. So I stayed quiet. I answered the occasional call, sent the occasional text. I even came home once or twice for Christmas just to keep the illusion alive, let them believe their obedient son was studying nearby while quietly becoming someone they'd never recognize. It hurt sometimes, sure. But the silence was better than the noise I'd grown up with. And deep down, I knew if I ever let them back in, they'd just find a new way to clip my wings. So I kept my distance. I focused on building a life that belonged entirely to me, one class, one paycheck, one lie at a time. It had been a quiet couple of months. I was cruising along at work, enjoying the routine of my new life, gym in the mornings, spreadsheets by day, silence by night. The distance between me and my family had become this quiet buffer I didn't know I needed. I wasn't haunted by texts or calls, and for once I wasn't being pulled into anyone else's drama. Then one morning I saw his name flash across my screen, Dad. I stared at it for a second, thumb hovering. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me to answer. "Hey Ethan," he said, way too casually. "Listen, your brother's getting married." My heart didn't drop. It didn't even flinch. I just went cold. He wanted me to come home. Not just for the wedding. He asked me to show up a few days early to help out with the preparations. Like nothing had ever happened. Like I hadn't disappeared across state lines and built a life from scratch without their knowledge. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. "We want everyone together. It's a big moment for Zach." I didn't know what to say. Part of me, a very small part, wanted to believe maybe this was his version of reaching out. That maybe somehow he'd started to see me. But deep down, I knew better. I told him I'd think about it. I hung up, and for the next 2 days I walked around with this heavy pit in my stomach. Not sadness, not fear, just confusion. I'd spent so long trying to detach myself from them, and now here they were pulling me back in like nothing had changed. I didn't sleep much that night. Memories kept rushing back, Zach blowing out birthday candles on cakes I never got. Me sitting on the sidelines while my parents cheered him on like he was their only child. Every ignored accomplishment. Every brushed-off conversation. I knew what this was. It wasn't about me. They didn't want me there. They wanted the image of me, the nice older brother, the helpful son, the family man who shows up when it matters. They wanted to look whole in front of neighbors and friends. So the next morning, I sent a short text. "I won't be able to make it. Hope the wedding goes well." That should have been the end of it. Instead, the guilt trip train pulled out of the station fast. First came Mom. "Ethan, are you really going to miss Zach's big day? He's your brother. He'll be crushed. It would mean so much to him if his big brother was there. You only get one family, honey." I stared at those texts like they were written by someone who hadn't raised me. Like she hadn't spent 20 years ignoring every moment of my life that didn't revolve around Zach. Then came Dad. Less emotional, more calculated. Families stick together. Especially on occasions like this. And when that didn't work, he went straight for the gut punch. "If you don't come, we're done paying your tuition." That made me laugh. Loud, honest, unexpected laughter. He really thought that would break me. I hadn't needed his money in over a year. I was making more than he probably ever had in a job I'd landed on my own merit, with a degree from a school they didn't even know I'd attended. So I called him back. Calm. Collected. "Do what you need to do, Dad," I said. "I'm not coming to the wedding. You can keep the money. I don't need it." He didn't say anything for a moment. I could almost hear his brain trying to process that the kid he thought he controlled had just slipped completely out of reach. I didn't tell him the full truth, not yet. I didn't know him that. But something in his silence told me the illusion was starting to crack. This wasn't about family. It never had been. It was about control, image, power. And for the first time in my life, they didn't have any of it. I figured my refusal to attend Zach's wedding would cause a stir, but I wasn't prepared for how quickly it all unraveled. The fallout came faster than I expected. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was my dad, and this time, he wasn't pretending to play nice. He skipped any form of greeting and jumped straight into rage. "Where the hell have you been, Ethan?" he snapped. "What have you been doing with all the money we sent you?" I leaned back in my chair, smirking. The truth was, I'd been waiting for this. Apparently, after my refusal to attend the wedding, he decided to punish me the way he thought would hurt most. He drove down to the local college to formally withdraw me. Yep. He marched in there, probably puffed up with self-righteous fury, expecting to embarrass me or yank my future away. Only, there was no Ethan Parker enrolled at that college. I could only imagine the look on his face. Years of lies crashing into reality like a brick wall. He was humiliated. You could hear it in his voice, that sharp edge of panic, confusion, and anger all tangled up. "What the hell is going on?" he barked. "They said you've never been a student there." I chuckled. Couldn't help it. "Because I haven't," I said. "I never went there, Dad." I moved out of state the day I left and enrolled in the school you told me not to go to. On a full scholarship. There was silence. The kind that fills a room and sucks all the oxygen out of it. And I graduated, I added. A year ago. I've been working ever since. I have my own place. A 6-figure salary. Benefits. Promotions. I've been doing just fine without your help. Still silence, but I could feel the tension boiling on the other end. You lied to us, he finally said, his voice low, like I'd committed some sort of high crime. We supported you. We trusted you. I laughed again, this time colder. You supported Zach, I shot back. You spent your lives making sure he had everything: attention, praise, money, excuses. Me? I was just the quiet kid you barely noticed unless I was in the way. And you want to talk about trust? You never trusted me to make decisions for myself. I had to lie just to survive in this family. He exploded after that. Said I was ungrateful. That I'd betrayed him. That everything he did was for the good of the family. But we both knew the truth. Nothing he did was for me. Then came the final blow, his solution. You want to make it right? Come to the wedding, he said. Stand with your brother. Don't let people talk. There it was. The whole truth, out in the open. He didn't care about me. He cared about the optics. About what the neighbors would say. About putting on a united front while the family golden boy tied the knot. All for show. No, I said, voice steady. You don't get to guilt me back into pretending we're a happy family. I'm not doing it. You owe us. I owe you nothing, I interrupted. And if anything, you owe me a childhood you never gave me. He tried again to spin it, to act like the bigger man, like he was trying to make things right. But I wasn't buying it. I'm done, I said. Don't call me again. Don't text. Don't show up. You made your choice a long time ago, and now I'm making mine. Before he could say anything else, I hung up. Then I blocked his number. That was it. The moment I cut the last string tying me to the people who had treated me like a placeholder in their perfect family photo. And you know what? It felt good. Not in a vengeful, dramatic way, just peaceful. Like the storm had finally passed and I could finally stand in the quiet and breathe. It had been a few weeks since I cut them off, my parents, my brother, the whole toxic circus. I thought that would be the end of it. That I could just ride off into the peaceful life I built, finally free. Then out of nowhere, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mom. I had blocked both of my parents' phones after the last blow-up, so this one snuck through somehow. Her voice was shaky, and before I could even say anything, she burst into tears. I just want my son back, she cried. None of that other stuff matters. Not what your father said. Not the wedding. We just miss you. It threw me. Not because I believed her, but because that sudden warmth that "we care about you" tone had never existed when I was younger. She sounded like a completely different person, and that alone made me suspicious. I didn't hang up right away. I said I'd call her back later, but I had a weird gut feeling something was off. Something didn't sit right. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in a while, my Aunt Karen, my mom's younger sister. She was the only extended family member who ever treated me like more than a piece of furniture growing up. And what she told me, it blew everything wide open. Turns out, Zach's picture-perfect bride-to-be? A complete scam artist. Apparently, just before the wedding, she convinced my parents, Zach, and even a few other gullible relatives to invest in what she called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Some fancy-sounding overseas venture that promised double returns in less than 6 months. She claimed it was only for a family, that she was letting them in early because she trusted them. They all bought in. Every last one of them. She took everything, their savings, investments, even the emergency fund my mom kept squirreled away. Then just a few days before the wedding she vanished. No ceremony. No cake. No photos. Just an empty venue and a long trail of bank withdrawals. And it didn't end there. Aunt Karen also told me my dad had been spiraling for months, fighting with employees at the company, botching deals, refusing to listen to anyone. After the wedding disaster, he apparently had a meltdown in front of a major client, which cost him what was left of the business. They had used the house as collateral for a loan to save the company. Now that the deal fell through, the bank was coming for the house too. Their perfect little world had crumbled. And now they were broke. Living in a rundown studio apartment, eating ramen and clinging to the last pieces of their old life. No golden boy. No mansion. No business. And that, I realized, was why my mom had suddenly missed me. It wasn't about love. It was about desperation. They needed a safety net. And guess who they saw as the only one left standing? Me. The invisible son they once ignored now looked a lot like a lifeline. It all made sense now, the calls, the emotional pleas, the sudden warmth from people who never gave me more than polite indifference. It wasn't real. It was survival. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. Not anymore. For years, they put all their energy into propping up Zach like he was some kind of prince. They handed him everything, covered for him, built their world around him. And now the prince had burned the kingdom to the ground. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. I thought they'd give up after the wedding disaster. After the silence. After I made it clear I wanted nothing to do with any of them. But people like my parents don't go away quietly, not when they still think they can squeeze something out of you. A few days after the call from my mom, I came home from work, arms full of groceries, and froze at the sight of two figures waiting outside my building. My parents. I nearly dropped the bags. They looked worn down. My dad's polo shirt was wrinkled, and my mom looked like she hadn't slept in days. There was no smugness, no superiority left in their eyes, just exhaustion and panic. "Ethan," my mom started, her voice cracking. "Please, just hear us out." My dad stepped in, more forceful. "We're not asking for much. We just need help getting back on our feet. We spent our last money flying out here to see you." That last part was supposed to make me feel guilty, I think. Like I'd owe them something because they spent money on a plane ticket. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, keys in my hand, heart pounding. Not because I was scared, but because I'd been waiting for this moment for years. The moment they'd show up needing me. They went on about family values, about how I was their oldest son and how we were supposed to take care of one another. My dad even threw in a line about what would people think if they knew their own son wouldn't help them. That's when I laughed. Actually laughed. "You mean the same way you took care of me?" I said, finally unlocking the door. "You ignored me my entire life until you ran out of money and Zach ran off a cliff. Zach didn't mean to. Save it." I stepped inside and started closing the door. "Ethan, please," my mom called. "We're family. We're all we have left." I looked her in the eye, steady and calm. "No, Mom. You had me. For 20 years. You just didn't care." And I shut the door in their faces. I leaned against the inside for a moment after it latched, heart still racing. I could hear them knocking, pleading, raising their voices. I didn't answer. I didn't budge. Eventually they gave up. But it wasn't over. A few days later, Zach showed up. No warning. Just stood on my porch like a kid who'd lost his dog. His cocky charm was gone, replaced by puffy eyes and a voice that cracked every other word. "I miss you, man," he said. "I know I was a jerk. I know. But I need you right now. Mom and Dad are threatening to cut me off completely. They're saying this whole thing was my fault." I stared at him, emotionless. Part of me wanted to unload every buried memory, every moment he'd stolen my joy for his own amusement. But instead, I kept it short. "You made your bed, Zach," I said, arms crossed. "Now lie in it." I just thought maybe. "If any of you come back here," I said quietly, "I'll call the cops." And I shut the door again. This time with no hesitation. Later that night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker. I should have felt triumphant, like I'd won. But what I felt was more complicated, a strange blend of relief and grief. I didn't lose a family that day. I confirmed they were never really mine. But what I gained? Peace. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that slips in slowly, fills the gaps, and lets you finally breathe. I wasn't their golden child. I never would be. But I was free. It's been over a month since I slammed the door, both literally and figuratively, on the people who gave me life, but never really gave me love. And for the first time, I've been waking up without that weight on my chest. No more checking my phone in dread. No more rehearsing what I'd say if they reached out again. Just silence. Beautiful, still, healing silence. I won't lie and say it's been easy. There are moments, quiet ones, where I wonder what it would have been like to have the kind of parents who showed up at school plays, who celebrated wins no matter how small, who didn't pit siblings against each other like some twisted competition. I think about what it would feel like to call someone mom and feel warmth, or to hear "I'm proud of you, son," and actually believe it wasn't a performance. But then I remember how many times I stared down those empty dinner tables, or sat in the stands alone while they cheered for Zach like I didn't exist. I remember every time I was asked to shrink so he could shine, and I remind myself, I didn't walk away from love. I walked away from survival. Now, I'm finally living. My career's doing better than ever. I just got promoted, higher pay, more responsibility, and a team that actually respects me. I've been traveling, trying new things, meeting people who see me for who I really am, not who they want me to be. And maybe for the first time in my life, I'm starting to think about building something of my own. A home that feels safe. A family that feels real. The kind where kids are loved equally. No one is ignored, and love isn't given in exchange for performance. Some days I catch myself imagining that future. A little house with a dog in the yard, Sunday pancakes, laughter that doesn't have conditions. A partner who listens, kids who feel seen. A version of me that isn't just surviving, he's thriving. And that's when I realize, I broke the cycle. It ends with me. I don't know what the future holds, and I'm okay with that. All I know is, I'm done being the forgotten son. I'm done pretending I was ever less than enough. I'm Ethan Parker. I made it out. And now I finally get to live life on my terms.